We think this is important because it's so easy to get stuck in short-term thinking and reactive thinking instead of dreaming big. The end goal of systems thinking is to gain new insights about how the system works and why, where its problems are, and how changes can be made to the system to make the system more effective and efficient. Problems that are ideal for a systems thinking intervention have the following characteristics. The issue is important, the problem is chronic, the problem is familiar and has a known history, and people have unsuccessfully tried to solve the problem before. Does that sound familiar? Systems science maps feedstocks and flows, and that pretty much sums up what recycling is. Donella Meadows was a pioneering environmental and systems scientist, and I sometimes go to her writings for inspiration. I found this great passage written 30 years ago in 1989 that I wanted to share with you. The citizens of the 21st century need to be taught to do more than separate at the moment of discard the materials that flow through their lives. They need to understand the long path that brought those materials into their hands and the path that will follow after the stuff is deposited into the bin labeled plastics. What we are doing so far is separation, not recycling. We're figuring out how to reclaim materials before they get to the dump. We have barely begun to close the loop, to reuse major materials in the same products. Newspapers back to newspapers, plastic soda bottles back to plastic soda bottles. She goes on to say, product to same product recycling is the only kind that can work in the long run. The plastics industry is congratulating itself too soon for turning soda bottles into plastic flower pots. It doesn't take much of a genius to reflect upon the nation's consumption rate of soda versus flower pots to predict a market collapse due to a flower pot glut, end quote. I love that. So 30 years hence, 9% of the world's plastics are recycled and 18 million metric tons of plastic flow into the oceans every year. Plastic consumes 35 to 45% of all synthetic polymers produced in total. We've all heard, but it's worth repeating, that by 2025, 6 years from now, there will be 1 ton of plastics for every 3 tons of fish, and more plastic than fish by 2050. But here's the thing. We're all good at identifying the problem, but if we don't understand the system, our interventions are often misguided and unsuccessful. Systems thinking acknowledges that there are no perfect solutions, but it allows us to make informed choices, and that's the improvement. So where do we begin? We think that a good place to intervene is in communities. Communities need to understand their options for local control. Elected leaders have the power to influence the presence and types of recycling programs, to define what recycling means for their community, and to demand measurement and accountability. Of course, citizens have the power to influence their elected leaders by using their voices, like Sandy Brown and her Green Team in Wayne, and like Alyssa Fuenzalita's Mission Infinity group that organized a grassroots campaign to influence and support the cardboard ban in Lincoln. Individuals can influence change by consuming less and buying local. Think how much less packaging is needed when you buy local versus online. Businesses who are responsible for more than 50% of the waste generated can improve their bottom line by designing products using recovered materials, designing for repair and recyclability, and by developing a more local supply chain. Now in our second year, Nebraska Recycling Council has been discovering how best to support the web of materials management programs across the state. We have hosted webinars such as community-based social marketing, navigating Lincoln's cardboard ban, and hub and spoke systems. We have provided design and funding for recycling education flyers in Custer County. We have supported the development of a hub and spoke partnership in Northeast Nebraska. which is still ongoing. We have enlisted help from our new advisory council to map recycling systems in their region in Nebraska, and we have just completed a matrix for them to enter that information. Between January 1st and September 15th of this year, we've already awarded nearly $226,000 in recycling equipment grants. And we've been collaborating with Keep Nebraska Beautiful affiliates, Goodwills, and recycling service providers across Nebraska. And we're looking ahead. Yesterday, our staff and board worked on a strategic plan that we're developing for the next 5 years. And some of you have already picked these up, but we've created some fact sheets that are designed to be used by elected officials and at city council meetings, so that that will help communities think about their options in their solid waste and recycling systems. For America Recycles Day on November 15th, we're launching a single-use plastics campaign. It will include a pledge to reduce or eliminate the use of these products and a drawing for a portable to-go kit. Next year, we'll have a community recycling toolkit with an assessment tool, a community action plan template, sample ordinances, and more. These deliverables are important, but we all know the world changes for better or worse depending on the choices people make. And it's in leadership and relationships where it all happens. We can make better choices when we think in systems and when we help each other dream big. Nebraska Recycling Council is eager to work with all of you in 2019, and we're looking forward to it. This year in particular, the China materials ban has rocked the global recycling system with serious effects in Nebraska. Our keynote speaker, Jerry Powell, will provide some insights into the situation. His work has helped recycling stakeholders, including our organization, stay abreast of national and global trends. Jerry is a respected expert in the national recycling arena. He is the owner of 3 highly respected magazines, Resource Recycling, eScrap, News, and Plastics Recycling Update, and he aids in the management of annual conferences related to each subject matter. Please help me welcome Jerry Powell.
I have a question, really, Danielle, Julie, everybody, a journalist to give this keynote address. You know, in many ways, as you'll quickly learn, journalists are famous for never letting facts get in the way of a good story. And I can assure you that'll be that today. It reminds me of a situation, kind of an acquaintance of mine told me about his son. The little guy was having trouble. So he and his wife took the boy to a psychiatrist, and after several sessions, the psychiatrist wanted a private meeting with the parents, and they said to the parents, he said, look, bad news, good news. Bad news, your son gossips, doesn't get along with others, and he's kind of a social outcast. And the father said, wait up. Our son doesn't get along with others. He's a gossip, and he lacks social skills. Whatever could be the good news from that. And he said, and the psychiatrist looks at the mother and the father and says, he has all the attributes to be an excellent journalist. So sometimes I feel like from on this stage of simply saying, hi, my name's Jerry, I'm a journalist, and I'm trying to recover. Really, what I want to talk to is exactly to follow on the excellent comments Julie had about system changes. We are going through it. I'm going to point out a summary of where we're at, and a few of these slides might be a summary also of where Husker football is, because seismic change is underway in recycling and that football team. But calm down. Really, we will get through this. We remain very successful. Do you realize that recycling is, by far, the largest environmental movement the world's ever known? Add up all the people like myself with our Priuses and all that sort of stuff, it never comes close to what's happening here in Nebraska and elsewhere. Let me give you an example, and I welcome our elected officials here. Do you realize on the first week of November, when you have a gubernatorial, you have a senatorial, you have a variety of races, do you realize that more people in Nebraska will take part in recycling than vote? Think about that. You're more popular than democracy. And given the last couple of weeks, recycling systems, and I hope Husker football is also flexible and resilient. We are, I got a question for you, and embarrass some of you. How many of you are 45 years or younger? Raise your hands. You weren't born before I was in the recycling industry. So I do have some experience. I had a company that went bankrupt, insolvent in the 70s because of a similar market crisis. We are resilient. We will move forward. But I have to tell you that landfilling here is too cheap. Nebraska, come on. You're about 20%, 15 to 20% under the national average. There's a direct correlation between successful recycling and high disposal. Where I come from in Portland, Oregon, it's nearly $100 a ton disposal. You can pick up the garbage, buff it and shine it and ship it anywhere at $100 a ton. And you can't do that at 40. Energy is going to be a major issue. For one thing, you're going to see far fewer waste energy plants. They are not going to come online because of cheap shale oil and gas. Another issue that we have is it makes things cheaper. The plastics prices will remain in a slump, as I'll show you, very flat line. This is our charting on milk jug pricing. It'll stay in that 30 to 40 cent per pound range for a long time because of our oil and gas, the amount of low-cost fuels that we have. It's also the case that our argument that recycle, it saves energy in manufacturing. Well, if you have cheap energy, the benefits are still there, but not at the magnitude previously. Okay, yes, we have a crisis. First the green funds and then the national sword created a huge issue. We need to understand that some of it is highly fraught. We aren't recycling, say, 3 through 7 plastic bottles. And my response to that in some ways is big deal. It's only 5% of the bottles. The PET, the HDPE, and everything else have a vibrant and growing market. But we have seen a decline in exports for the first half of the year. These are the numbers. On the right hand is the U.S. In 2018 compared to previous. Paper, as you'll see here, is at a rate of about half of what it was. Exports, about half of it was 4 years previous. And that's because there's no more market in China, banned, for mixed paper, which is, for First Art and everybody else, is a very, very important market. Why? Chinese want to be like us. One of the great stories in China is the role of social media. They are now communicating among themselves rather than through governmentally controlled mechanisms. They're tired of smog and everything else. So the real purpose of the National Sword was to shut down 1,600 polluting, terrible paper mills and plastic plants. They're at about 900 closures so far. In other words, the initial part of the Chinese situation is good for the environment and good for them. The response has been good. We're now seeing many states moving into market development activities. I hope here in Lincoln that you would consider initiatives to aid markets. Material quality, we were getting away with murder sending garbage off, and we've got to stop that, and that's good. And we're seeing we have an interactive chart on all of our websites that show Chinese investment in the United States, but we're also seeing investment in the United States with new paper mills and other ones and other consuming factories being announced. This is good news. There is a change in the garbage system. The Amazon effect, brown boxes and residences, has changed up MRFs all over the country. And you're seeing the evolving ton. You'll continue to see less paper, as obviously in business as well as homes, we see less of it. More plastics. You're going to see the replacement of some forms of metal packaging that way. And you'll see a kind of flat line for other items. But all sorts of new products are going to come out. This is a fascinating one. It's beautiful package, just wonderful because it shows you what you're going to get. It's PET and aluminum. So they shipped samples of it to the PET and said, great. The PET recycling industry says, great, it's wonderful, wonderful plastic. We don't want it, the metal. And so they would send it to the aluminum industry. The aluminum industry responded and says, don't you know that plastics in the furnace creates heat spurts and ruins the melt? We don't want it either. Two wonderful recyclable materials can't recycle that, and yet they want to bring it out. You will see more stewardship programs. California just signed a bill yesterday to regulate needles and sharps, and that the people who sell those to diabetics and elsewhere have to be involved in the waste management, waste collection of those. You'll see it, and we need it. It's sensible. We should do it in tires and paint. We have paint statewide in our state. We have mattresses. We need to do more. Food is going to be, if you want to grow your program, do food. Food is where it's at. In my home, I'm, an environmentalist, but I'm not some, off the top. I have once a month collection. Why? All my food is collected with my yard debris weekly. We have a super recycling system. So what do I have for garbage? Polystyrene, some wood, some textiles, and everything else. Add food to programs and get a third more recycling and composting done. Sadly, how many private haulers do you have left? You'll see fewer and fewer. Mergers and consolidations are a natural part of our industry, and more Waste Connections and others will be doing that. Scrapyards are consolidating up. As my company knows, I think my company is the only asset in recycling in America that no one seems to want to buy. We will, though, see corporate sustainability initiatives going. When you look at this, no one knows the numbers on the recycling partnership, but corporations probably have put up $20 million to improve recycling systems here and elsewhere. The Closed Loop Fund, which is a grant loan, low-interest loan program, has $100 million, $40 million so far invested in good recycling processes. You're seeing all sorts of initiatives by corporate interests to improve recycling. This is no longer only a government function. Washington may help. I can see a situation, for instance, if we can finally get the large transportation bill underway, we would be well off. My buddy Dave Keeling of the Steel Recycling Institute, also the president of the board of the National Recycling Coalition, would agree with me that if we can get a transportation bill, we will see a lot of recycled steel, a lot of recycled aluminum and plastics consumed. We need to repair this country's infrastructure. That is about as bipartisan as you can get, and we should do it. But yes, systems are changing. This little short speech I'm giving, this might be the most important. We are making efforts to dive deeper into the container and get more material out. I applaud Lincoln for joining many hundreds of other communities. I use the number generally around 70% recovery. When an item is at 70% recovery, why don't we mandate, and there's markets available, why don't we mandate for the other 30%? The vast majority of the residents and businesses are taking part already, so why don't we get the recalcitrants to catch up? Lincoln did the right action. We're also seeing strong efforts to reduce contamination. We have too many people. How many of you know what wishful recycling is? Anybody? Wishful recycling is to look at your 60-gallon cart and stuff it. Now, it worked in some ways. Our firm did a study one time of plastics industry asked us to find all of the mixed rigid plastic recycling communities. Mixed rigids are buckets and pails and tubs and that sort of stuff. So we found 258. We have a large database, obviously. And we contacted them. Every one of those communities started recycling, not out of a plan, not out of a market study. They started because they ended up with it. The plastic buyer came to the MRF and said, I like your PET. I'm really interested in that plastic. What's that? That's our mix. We're sipping in the landfill. The guy says, nah, I'll pay you 2 cents a pound. So yes, sometimes wishful recycling works, but nah, if you're going to stuff your garden hose in there, I don't see garden hoses being recycled. And we have way too much. We got to get contamination down. And yes, we're going to see more and more communities. Red Lobster this morning announced no more straws worldwide. You're starting to see everybody do that. You'll see not only inside bans, corporate, but also legislated. That is it in the broad context of where I'm coming from, and I hope that leaves a few seconds for questions. I mean, you're on time? Okay. How many lawyers in the room? Any? Good. You got to have a slide like this now. So there was, by the way, no gluten used in developing this presentation. But the most important one is the way I do this is I learn from others. And I would love to, my old buddy Gene Hanlon's back there. I thought maybe Dale would be, I'm talking to guys in my age group, men and women in my age group. But I'd love to, my ACE staff, editorial staff would love to hear what you're doing. But I again applaud you. I'm eager to hear of your awards. I commend the award winners now and the previous award winners. You are what is making Nebraska hum in this country, in this state, and it's wonderful, your effort. So it's great to be invited to an awards banquet. Thank you.